The gavel fell with a sound that shattered Emma Taylor's world. Custody is hereby awarded to the plaintiff, Susan Taylor. Judge Vincent Hargrove's voice echoed through the sterile courtroom, each word hitting Emma like a physical blow. The minor child will be transferred to the mother's care within 48 hours. Emma's breath caught in her throat. 48 hours, 2 days to pack up 14 years of her life with the only parent who'd ever truly loved her. She watched her father, David Taylor, grip the edge of the defendant's table so hard his knuckles turned white. His face had gone ashen, the color draining away as if someone had opened a valve. "Your Honor," David's attorney, a tired-looking man named Peterson, rose unsteadily. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." With all due respect, my client has been the primary caregiver since the child was 3 years old. He has a stable income, a loving home environment, and the court has made its decision. Judge Hargrove cut him off with a wave of his manicured hand. The biological mother has successfully demonstrated her commitment to rehabilitation and her desire to reconnect with her daughter. Emma's eyes darted to the woman sitting across the aisle, Susan Taylor, the stranger who shared her DNA but had been absent from her life for over a decade. Susan's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man in an expensive suit, was already gathering his papers with the satisfied air of someone who had expected this victory all along. But it was Judge Hargrove himself who made Emma's skin crawl. Something about the way he looked at her father, not with the neutral professionalism she'd expected from television courtrooms, but with what almost seemed like contempt. His eyes were cold, calculating, and when they briefly met Emma's gaze, she saw something that chilled her, complete indifference to the pain he was causing. "This is wrong," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the shuffling of papers and murmured conversations. "Dad, this is wrong." David Taylor reached for his daughter's hand, his own trembling slightly. "I know, sweetheart. I know it is." The courtroom began to empty, but Emma remained frozen in her seat, her mind racing. She had always been good with patterns, with numbers, with seeing things that others missed. It was what made her excel in her advanced mathematics classes, what helped her solve puzzles that stumped her classmates. And right now, every instinct she possessed was screaming that something about this ruling didn't add up. Susan Taylor approached their table, her movements hesitant and awkward. She looked older than Emma remembered from the few photographs David kept hidden away. Her blonde hair was streaked with premature gray, and her clothes, while clean, showed signs of wear. This was supposed to be the rehabilitated mother who deserved custody? "Emma, I know this is hard, but I want you to know that I've changed. I've been going to meetings, and I have a steady job now, and—" "Where?" Emma's question was sharp, cutting through her mother's nervous rambling. "Where do you work? Where are we going to live? What's your job?" Susan glanced nervously at her attorney, who stepped forward smoothly. "Mrs. Taylor has secured employment with Midwest Holdings, a subsidiary company that provides excellent benefits and housing assistance. Everything has been arranged to ensure Emma's smooth transition." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Midwest Holdings. I've never heard of them. What do they do?" "Emma, honey, let's not overwhelm your mother," David said gently, but Emma could hear the strain in his voice. He was asking the same question she was, she could tell. Judge Hargrove was still at his bench, writing something in what appeared to be a ledger rather than the official court records. Emma watched him carefully, noting how he seemed to be avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room now that his ruling was complete. When he finally did look up, it was directly at Susan's attorney, and Emma caught something that made her stomach drop. The briefest nod, almost like a signal between conspirators. "We should go," David said quietly, helping Emma gather her things. We need to talk about arrangements." As they walked through the courthouse corridors, Emma's mind continued to race. Her father was a good man. Everyone who knew him said so. He worked 2 jobs to make sure she had everything she needed, helped with her homework every night, never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. He had raised her alone since her mother left him when she was 3, and he had never once made her feel like she was a burden. Susan Taylor, on the other hand, had been absent for 11 years. She had struggled with addiction, had been in and out of rehabilitation programs, and had made no effort to maintain contact with Emma despite court-ordered visitation rights. The idea that she was now a more suitable parent was not just wrong, it was mathematically impossible given the evidence. "Dad, something isn't right about this," Emma said as they reached the courthouse steps. David paused, looking down at his daughter with tired eyes. "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes the legal system—" "No," Emma interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "I mean, something is really wrong. Judge Hargrove didn't even look at our evidence. Did you see how he was writing in that book? And the way he looked at Susan's lawyer? Dad, what if—" She trailed off, afraid to voice the thought that was forming in her mind. What if the system wasn't just flawed? What if it was corrupt? That evening, Emma sat in her bedroom surrounded by boxes she was supposed to be packing. Instead, she had her laptop open and was doing what she did best, looking for patterns. She started with Judge Vincent Hargrove's recent custody cases, accessing public records through the county's online database. What she found made her blood run cold. In the past 2 years, Judge Hargrove had presided over 43 custody cases. In 39 of them, he had ruled in favor of the party represented by one of 3 law firms, Morrison and Keller and Associates, Westfield Legal Group, and Blackstone Family Law. The same 3 firms that seemed to handle cases for clients with connections to larger corporate entities, clients who could afford expensive legal representation for what should have been straightforward family matters. Emma pulled up the financial records that were publicly available, cross-referencing the firms with their corporate clients. A pattern began to emerge, a web of connections that seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Many of the winning parents in these custody cases had ties to companies that, when traced back through layers of corporate paperwork, connected to a handful of larger organizations. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Lena. "How are you holding up? This is so unfair." Emma stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, "It's not just unfair, it's wrong, and I'm going to prove it." She looked back at her computer screen, at the patterns of corruption that were becoming clearer with each passing hour. Judge Vincent Hargrove might think he had won, that a 14-year-old girl would simply accept his ruling and move on with her life. He had no idea what was coming for him. The first week at Susan's apartment was worse than Emma had imagined. The 1-bedroom unit in a rundown complex on Chicago's South Side reeked of stale cigarettes and something else Emma couldn't identify but made her stomach turn. Susan had given her the couch and hung a sheet as a makeshift privacy curtain, calling it Emma's room with forced cheerfulness that no one fooled.
But what bothered Emma more than the living conditions was how wrong everything felt. Susan claimed to work at Midwest Holdings, yet she was home every day by 3 o'clock and never seemed to have any work to bring home. Any phone calls from supervisors, or any of the stress that Emma associated with her father's demanding schedule. When Emma asked about her job, Susan's answers were vague and rehearsed. "I do administrative work," Susan had said the 3rd day, not looking up from her daytime television program. "You know, filing, organizing, that sort of thing." "For what kind of company? What does Midwest Holdings do?" "Oh, they're involved in various business ventures, property management, consulting, that sort of thing." Emma had spent enough time listening to her father discuss his work to know that real jobs came with real details. Susan was lying, and she was bad at it. On Thursday evening, while Susan was taking one of her frequent long showers, Emma used her phone to research Midwest Holdings. What she found was troubling. The company existed on paper, but had almost no online presence, no customer reviews, no detailed description of services. It was registered as a subsidiary of something called Crown Enterprises, which was itself a subsidiary of two other companies in an endless chain that seemed designed to obscure rather than clarify. Emma was still researching when her phone rang. Her father's name lit up the screen. "Hey, sweetheart." David's voice was warm but tired. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay, Dad. How's the appeal coming?" There was a pause. "Peterson says it could take months, maybe longer. Judge Hargrove's ruling was comprehensive. He made it sound like I was an unfit parent, Emma. After 11 years of raising you alone, he made it sound like I was the problem." Emma's grip tightened on her phone. "Dad, I've been thinking about what happened in court. Do you remember anything unusual about Judge Hargrove? The way he acted, things he said?" "What do you mean?" "He barely looked at our evidence. And when he made his ruling, it felt like he had already decided before we even presented our case. Plus, the way he looked at Susan's lawyer." David was quiet for a moment. "Emma, I know this is hard to accept, but sometimes judges make decisions that seem unfair. It doesn't mean there's some conspiracy." "What if there is, though, Emma?" Emma kept her voice low, aware that Susan could emerge from the bathroom at any moment. "What if Judge Hargrove has a reason to rule the way he does that has nothing to do with what's best for the children involved?" "Dad, Emma," David's voice carried a warning tone she recognized from when she was younger and had asked too many questions about why her mother had left. "Dad, listen to me. I looked up Judge Hargrove's recent cases. In the past 2 years, he's ruled in favor of the same 3 law firms in almost 90% of custody cases. 90%, Dad. That's not normal variation. That's a pattern." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Emma wondered if the call had dropped. "How many cases?" David finally asked. 43 total, 39 favorable to the same firms. I can send you the data if you want to see it yourself. Emma, you need to be careful about making accusations like that. These are powerful people. And what? They'll take me away from you? Dad, they already did that. Emma heard Susan's footsteps in the hallway and quickly lowered her voice. I have to go, but Dad, promise me you'll look at the information I send you. Promise me you'll at least consider that something isn't right here. After she hung up, Emma lay on the uncomfortable couch staring at the water-stained ceiling. Everything in her logical mind told her she was on to something significant, but her father's reaction worried her. Was she letting her anger and frustration cloud her judgment? Was she seeing patterns that didn't really exist because she wanted so badly to find a reason why the judge's ruling was wrong? The next morning, Susan announced she had to go to work early and would be gone most of the day. Emma waited until she was sure Susan had left the building, then called a taxi to take her to the Chicago Public Library's downtown branch. If she was going to investigate Judge Hargrove properly, she needed resources beyond what she could access from Susan's apartment. The library's legal research section was intimidating, but Emma had spent enough time in libraries to know how to navigate complicated databases. She started with publicly available court records, printing out every custody case Judge Hargrove had presided over in the past 3 years. The patterns she had noticed online became even more pronounced when she could spread the physical documents across a table and examine them side by side. It wasn't just that the same law firms were winning cases, it was how they were winning. In case after case, Judge Hargrove had ruled in favor of parents who on paper seemed less qualified than their counterparts. Parents with sporadic employment histories beat out parents with stable careers. Parents with past legal troubles defeated parents with clean records. Parents who had been absent from their children's lives for years were suddenly deemed more suitable than parents who had been primary caregivers. But most disturbing was what Emma found when she started researching the law firms themselves. Morrison, Keller, and Associates,
Westfield Legal Group, and Blackstone Family Law all shared one thing in common. Their biggest clients weren't individual families seeking custody, but corporations and shell companies like Crown Enterprises, Apex Holdings, and Metropolitan Development Group. Emma felt her heart racing when she realized what she might be looking at. What if these custody cases weren't really about determining the best interests of children? What if they were about something else entirely? Something that required moving specific people into specific situations for reasons that had nothing to do with family law. She was deep in thought, surrounded by printouts and legal documents, when someone tapped her shoulder. Emma looked up to see a woman in her 40s with dark hair and intelligent eyes, wearing a simple but professional blue suit. "Excuse me," the woman said quietly, "but I couldn't help noticing what you're researching. Are you a journalism student?" Emma hesitated. "No, It's personal research, about a family court case." The woman's expression grew more serious. "Mind if I sit down? My name is Sarah Cruz, and I work for the FBI. I couldn't help notice you've got some interesting documents there about Judge Vincent Hargrove." Emma's blood went cold. Had she done something illegal? Was researching public records somehow against the law? Agent Cruz must have seen the fear in Emma's eyes because she quickly raised her hands in a peaceful gesture. "You're not in trouble, but I have to ask, what's your interest in Judge Hargrove's cases?" Emma looked around the library, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. But something in Agent Cruz's manner seemed genuine, and Emma had learned to trust her instincts about people. "He took me away from my father," Emma said simply. "And I think the reason he did it has nothing to do with what's best for me." Agent Cruz leaned forward slightly. "What makes you think that?"
Emma pointed to the documents spread across the table. The patterns, the way he rules consistently in favor of the same law firms, even when the facts don't support those rulings. The way those law firms are connected to corporations rather than real families. The way he acted in court, like he had already decided before hearing our case. Agent Cruz was quiet for a long moment, studying Emma's face. "How old are you? 14? And you compiled all of this research yourself?" Emma nodded. Agent Cruz picked up one of the documents Emma had printed, scanning it quickly. "This is very thorough work, very organized." She looked back at Emma. "What's your name?" "Emma Taylor." "Emma, I think you and I need to have a much longer conversation." Agent Cruz led Emma to a small conference room on the library's second floor, the kind typically reserved for group study sessions. The windowless space felt both safe and claustrophobic as Cruz closed the door and took a seat across from Emma at the round table. "Before we go any further," Cruz said, pulling out her badge and sliding it across the table, "I want you to know exactly who I am and why I'm here." Emma examined the badge carefully. Special Agent Sarah Cruz, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Unit. The weight of those words settled over her like a heavy blanket. "Public Corruption Unit," Emma repeated. "We investigate government officials who abuse their power for personal gain. Judges, politicians, police officers, anyone who uses their position to break the law." Cruz retrieved her badge and leaned back in her chair. "I've been investigating irregularities in Chicago's court system for the past 6 months, and Judge Vincent Hargrove's name has come up more than once." Emma felt a surge of validation mixed with fear. "So I'm not crazy? There really is something wrong?" "Tell me about your case first," Cruz said gently. "Start from the beginning." Emma took a deep breath and recounted the custody hearing, describing her father's dedication as a parent, Susan's 11-year absence, and Judge Hargrove's behavior in court. As she spoke, Cruz took notes in a small leather notebook, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just listening. "And after the ruling?" Cruz prompted. Emma described her week with Susan, the inconsistencies in her mother's story about her job, and her research into the patterns in Hargrove's cases. Cruz's eyebrows rose when Emma mentioned the connection between the winning law firms and various corporate entities. "You noticed the corporate connections on your own?" "It wasn't hard once I started looking. These families that are winning custody, they're not real families, are they?
At least, not in the normal sense. Cruz was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that would change both their lives. Emma, what I'm about to tell you is part of an ongoing federal investigation. I need you to understand that this information is confidential and potentially dangerous. Emma nodded, her heart pounding. We believe Judge Hargrove is taking bribes to manipulate custody cases, but not for the reasons you might think. We don't think he's just helping wealthy parents win custody battles. We think he's being paid to place specific children with specific adults as part of a larger criminal operation. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. What kind of criminal operation? We're still piecing that together, but the preliminary evidence suggests it involves money laundering, possibly human trafficking, and definitely organized crime. The parents who are winning these cases aren't necessarily interested in raising children. They're interested in having legal guardianship over minors who can then be used for various illegal purposes. Emma felt sick. So, Susan, I don't know yet, but the company she claims to work for, Midwest Holdings, it's a front organization. It exists on paper, but has no real business operations. The address listed for their office is actually a vacant storefront that's been empty for 8 months. Emma sank back in her chair, overwhelmed by the implications. So Judge Hargrove didn't give Susan custody because he thought she was a better parent. He gave her custody because someone paid him to. That's what we suspect, yes. But suspecting and proving are two different things. Cruz leaned forward. Emma, I have to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Are you safe where you are right now? Emma considered the question. Susan had been distant but not threatening. The apartment was awful but not dangerous. I think so. Susan mostly ignores me. She's never home anyway. Good, because I'm going to ask you to do something that might sound crazy for someone your age. Paused, choosing her words carefully. I want you to help us gather evidence against Judge Hargrove and the people who are bribing him. Emma stared at her. You want me to be some kind of spy? I want you to be observant. You're already in a position where you might overhear conversations, see documents, or notice patterns that we can't access from the outside. And honestly, Cruz smiled slightly, your analytical skills are better than some agents I've worked with. Emma felt a mixture of pride and terror. What would I have to do? Nothing that would put you in direct danger. Keep your eyes and ears open when you're with Susan. If she gets phone calls, try to remember who they're from and what's discussed. If people come to the apartment, note descriptions and license plates if possible. Most importantly, if you ever feel unsafe, you call me immediately. Cruz slid a business card across the table. My direct number is on the back. It goes straight to my cell phone 24 hours a day. Emma picked up the card, running her thumb over the embossed FBI seal. Agent Cruz, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you trusting me with this? I'm just a kid. Cruz was quiet for a moment, and Emma saw something shift in her expression, a hint of vulnerability in the professional facade. 15 years ago, when I was just starting as an agent, I worked a case involving a corrupt family court judge in Detroit. We knew he was taking bribes, but we couldn't prove it. While we were building our case, he continued making decisions that put children in danger. Cruz's voice grew softer. A 12-year-old girl named Maria Santos was placed with an adult who wasn't really her relative, just someone who had paid for custody. 3 months later, Maria disappeared. We never found her. Emma felt chills run down her spine. I promised myself that if I ever got another chance to stop someone like that judge, I wouldn't worry about conventional investigative methods or proper procedures. I would do whatever it took to protect the children involved. Cruz looked directly at Emma. You're not just helping us.
Catch Judge Hargrove. You're helping us prevent what happened to Maria from happening to other kids. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Emma thought about all the documents she had reviewed, all the children who had been placed with questionable guardians by Judge Hargrove's rulings. How many of them were in real danger? How many were like her, living with people who had ulterior motives for gaining custody? What do you need me to do? Emma asked. Cruz smiled, And for the first time since entering the conference room, Emma felt genuinely hopeful. First, we're going to teach you how to document everything you observe without leaving evidence that you're investigating. Then, we're going to start building a case that will not only get you back with your father, but will make sure Judge Vincent Hargrove never has the power to hurt another family again. As they spent the next hour discussing observation techniques and communication protocols, Emma realized she was no longer just a victim of a corrupt system. She was becoming an active participant in bringing that system down. The scared, confused girl who had sat in Judge Hargrove's courtroom a week ago was transforming into someone new, someone who had found her purpose in the fight for justice. When Emma finally returned to Susan's apartment that evening, she looked around the dingy space with new eyes. This wasn't just her temporary prison anymore. It was her base of operations in a war against corruption, and she was no longer fighting alone. Emma's life had become a careful balance of pretending to be a normal teenager while secretly documenting evidence of one of Chicago's most sophisticated criminal operations. 3 weeks into her collaboration with Agent Cruz, she had learned to move through Susan's apartment like a ghost, memorizing phone numbers, photographing documents when Susan wasn't looking, and recording conversations with a pen that Cruz had given her disguised as a regular ballpoint. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening when Susan received a call that she thought Emma couldn't hear from her makeshift bedroom behind the sheet partition. Emma lay perfectly still on the couch, the recording pen positioned carefully on the coffee table as Susan's voice drifted from the kitchen. "No, she's not suspicious," Susan was saying, her voice carrying the nervous edge that Emma had come to recognize meant she was lying. "She spends most of her time doing homework or talking to her father on the phone. She doesn't pay attention to my business." Emma held her breath, straining to catch every word. "The next delivery is Thursday night, same as always. Building C, apartment 4B. Yes, I understand the timing has to be exact." Susan paused, and Emma could hear her lighting a cigarette. "What about the girl? How much longer do I have to keep her here?" Emma's blood ran cold. Whatever Susan was involved in, Emma was clearly just a temporary inconvenience, a role Susan was playing until she was no longer needed. "I know what we agreed, but this is harder than I thought it would be. She keeps asking questions about my job, about where I go during the day. She's smart, Victor, smarter than you said she would be." Victor. Emma committed the name to memory, along with everything else she was hearing. Building C, apartment 4B, Thursday night deliveries, and now a name, Victor, who seemed to be running whatever operation Susan was part of. "Fine," Susan said after a long pause, "but 2 more weeks, then we move to the next phase. But I want the full payment as soon as she's transferred. This wasn't what I signed up for." The call ended, and Emma lay in the darkness, processing what she had heard. Susan was being paid to keep Emma, but only temporarily. In 2 weeks, Emma would be transferred somewhere else, to someone else, as part of whatever criminal scheme Judge Hargrove had facilitated. The next morning, Emma called in sick to school and met Agent Cruz at a small cafe near the federal building. Cruz listened to the recording through earbuds, her expression growing darker with each passing second. "Building C, apartment 4B, Cruz repeated when the recording ended. "That's in the Riverside complex, about 6 blocks from where you're staying. And the name Victor." "You know who that is?" Emma asked. "We think so. Victor Marlowe. He's been on our radar for years, but we've never been able to make anything stick. Suspected money laundering, human trafficking, racketeering. He's connected to half the organized crime in Chicago, but he's careful. Very careful." Cruz pulled out her phone and scrolled through what appeared to be surveillance photos. She showed Emma the screen, a man in his 50s with silver hair and expensive clothes getting out of a black Mercedes. "Is this anyone you've seen around Susan's building?" Emma studied the photo carefully. "No, but Susan goes out most evenings around 7. She always dresses up like she's meeting someone important, and she always comes back with cash." "Cash?" "I've seen her counting it.
Hundreds, mostly. She keeps it in a shoebox in her closet. Emma hesitated. Agent Cruz, what did she mean about transferring me? Where would they send me? Cruz's expression softened with sympathy, but her voice remained professional. We're not going to let that happen, Emma. But what you've uncovered here is bigger than we initially suspected. It sounds like Judge Hargrove isn't just taking bribes for individual custody cases. He's part of a network that's systematically placing children into situations where they can be exploited. Emma felt sick. How many other kids? We don't know yet, but we're going to find out. Cruz leaned forward. Emma, I need you to ask you to do something that might be dangerous. Thursday night, when Susan goes to make this delivery, I want you to try to see what she's delivering and who she's meeting with. You want me to follow her? Emma asked. Not exactly. I want you to position yourself where you can observe from a safe distance. Building C should be visible from Susan's apartment building if you're on the right floor. Do you think you could get access to the roof or a higher floor? Emma thought about the building's layout. There's a laundry room on the 5th floor that has windows facing the right direction. Susan usually leaves around 7:30 for these meetings, and the laundry room is usually empty after 8. Perfect. But Emma, if you see anything that makes you uncomfortable, if anyone notices you watching, you leave immediately and call me. Your safety is more important than any evidence we might gather.
The documents spread across a large table, stacks and stacks of official-looking papers that even from a distance looked like court records and custody paperwork. Susan handed over a manila envelope and received what appeared to be a thick stack of cash in return. But the exchange lasted longer than a simple transaction should have. The men were showing Susan photographs, pointing to specific documents, and one of them kept gesturing toward what looked like a map of Chicago with pins marking various locations. Emma was so focused on trying to understand what she was seeing that she almost missed the most important detail. As Susan was leaving the apartment, one of the men followed her to the door, and in the light from the hallway, Emma could clearly see his face. It was the same man from the photograph Agent Cruz had shown her, Victor Marlowe. Emma quickly snapped several photos with the camera Cruz had given her, capturing images of the building, the apartment number, and what she could see of the interior through the window. As Susan made her way back toward their building, Emma packed up her equipment and headed for the stairwell, her mind racing with the implications of what she had witnessed. This wasn't just about custody manipulation anymore. The sheer volume of documents in that apartment, the number of people involved, the cash transactions. This was a massive operation that likely involved dozens or possibly hundreds of children who had been placed through fraudulent court rulings. When Emma called Agent Cruz the next morning, she could hear the excitement in the agent's voice as she described what she had observed. Emma, this is exactly what we needed. You've just provided us with visual confirmation that Victor Marlowe is directly involved in the custody manipulation scheme, and the fact that they have that much documentation suggests this operation is much larger than we suspected. What happens now? Emma asked. Now we start building a case that will bring down not just Judge Hargrove, but the entire network he's working with. And Emma, Cruz's voice grew serious, we need to start planning for your safety. If they're planning to transfer you in less than 2 weeks, we need to be ready to move before that happens. Emma looked around Susan's dingy apartment, at the woman who was pretending to be her mother while actually serving as her captor, and felt a surge of determination. She had started this investigation to understand why Judge Hargrove had separated her from her father. Now she realized she was fighting for something much bigger, the safety and freedom of countless children who were being treated as commodities in a criminal enterprise that reached into the highest levels of Chicago's legal system. The scared 14-year-old who had left the courthouse 3 weeks ago was gone.
In her place was someone who understood that sometimes the most important battles are fought not by adults in positions of power, but by young people who refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. Agent Cruz's plan was audacious and risky. Armed with Emma's recordings, photographs, and detailed observations, they would confront Judge Hargrove directly in his chambers, wearing hidden recording devices and hoping to catch him in admissions that would seal the case against him. Emma had argued for hours to be included in the confrontation, and Cruz had finally agreed, recognizing that Emma's presence might provoke Hargrove into revealing more than he would to a federal agent alone. "Remember," Cruz said as they walked through the courthouse corridors on Friday afternoon, "your job is to listen and observe. Let me do most of the talking, but if you notice anything I'm missing, don't hesitate to speak up. Sometimes judges are more careless around children because they don't see them as threats." Emma's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. She was about to face the man who destroyed her family, armed with evidence that he was part of a criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond her own case. The weight of responsibility was almost overwhelming. Judge Hargrove's chambers were as intimidating as Emma had expected. Dark wood paneling, law books lining every wall, and diplomas and awards that spoke to decades of what everyone had assumed was dedicated public service. Hargrove himself sat behind an enormous desk, his steel-gray eyes assessing Emma and Cruz with undisguised irritation. "Actually, Your Honor," Cruz replied smoothly, "Emma is here because she's been instrumental in uncovering evidence related to your recent custody rulings. We thought you might want to address some inconsistencies before we present our findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office." Hargrove's expression didn't change, but Emma noticed his hands tighten slightly on the pen he was holding. "I'm afraid I don't understand what you're implying, Agent Cruz. My rulings are based solely on the best interests of the children involved, as required by law." Emma couldn't help herself. Even when the children are being placed with people who aren't really their relatives? Even when those people are being paid to take custody by criminal organizations? Hargrove's eyes snapped to Emma, and for a moment she saw something dangerous flash across his face before he regained his composure. "Young lady, I think you've been watching too many television shows. Family court proceedings involve complex evaluations of fitness and stability that children your age simply cannot understand." Cruz leaned forward. "Your Honor, we have documented evidence that in the past 2 years you've ruled in favor of specific law firms in over 90% of custody cases, even when the evidence clearly favored the opposing parties. We also have evidence linking those law firms to shell companies and criminal organizations involved in money laundering and human trafficking." 90% seems high," Hargrove said with a slight smile. "I'd be interested to see your methodology for calculating that figure." Emma pulled out a folder she had prepared. "I analyzed every custody case you've presided over since January of last year, 43 cases total. 39 favorable rulings for Morrison, Keller and Associates, Westfield Legal Group, or Blackstone Family Law. That's 90.7% to be exact." Hargrove glanced at the folder but didn't reach for it. "Impressive research for someone your age. However, correlation does not imply causation, as I'm sure they'll teach you in statistics class someday. Perhaps those firms simply represent better prepared clients." "Better prepared how? Like Susan Taylor, who claims to work for a company that doesn't exist? Or like Michael Reeves, who gained custody of his niece despite never having met her before the custody hearing? Or like Patricia Valdez, who won custody of 3 children from different families in 3 separate cases, all within the same month? Emma watched Hargrove's face carefully as she mentioned each name. She had spent hours memorizing details from the most egregious cases, and she could see that her knowledge was making him uncomfortable. "Your Honor," Cruz said, turning away from Emma, "if you have specific allegations to make, I suggest you file them through proper channels. This informal discussion is beginning to feel like harassment." Cruz smiled. "Actually, Your Honor, we do have specific allegations. We have recordings of conversations involving Victor Marlowe and his associates discussing payments made to ensure favorable custody rulings. We have financial records showing unusual cash deposits into accounts connected to your personal finances. And we have witness testimony from individuals who've been approached about participating in fraudulent custody arrangements." Emma watched Hargrove's face carefully. His face remained impassive, but she noticed that he had stopped writing notes and was gripping his pen so tight his knuckles were white. "Victor Marlowe," Hargrove repeated slowly. "I'm not familiar with that name." "Really? Because he seems very familiar with your work. He's been able to predict your rulings with remarkable accuracy."
Hargrove stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Agent Cruz, I think this meeting has gone on long enough. If you have evidence of wrongdoing, present it to the appropriate authorities through official channels. I will not sit here and be interrogated by a child who clearly has an emotional investment in overturning a custody ruling that didn't go in her favor." "Emotional investment?" Emma's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You took me away from the only parent I've ever known and gave me to a woman who's being paid to keep me as part of a criminal conspiracy. You call that emotional investment?" "I call that the difficult but necessary work of family court," Hargrove replied coldly. "Sometimes children don't understand what's best for them." Cruz stood as well, recognizing that they had pushed as far as they could safely go. "Your Honor, we appreciate your time. We'll be in touch through official channels very soon." As they prepared to leave, Emma noticed something that made her blood run cold. On Hargrove's desk, partially hidden under other papers, was a manila folder with her name written on the tab. Inside the folder, she could see what appeared to be documents with official letterhead and multiple signatures. "Your Honor," Emma said, stopping at the door, "what's in that folder with my name on it?" Hargrove glanced at his desk and quickly shuffled papers to cover the folder. "Standard custody documentation, nothing that concerns you." But Emma had seen enough to know it wasn't standard documentation. The papers had looked like transfer orders, legal documents prepared in advance for her movement from Susan's custody to someone else's. The next phase that Susan had mentioned on the phone was already being planned, documented, and prepared for Judge Hargrove's signature. "Agent Cruz," Emma said quietly as they left the courthouse, "he's already preparing paperwork to transfer me somewhere else. He has documents ready, just waiting for the right moment." Cruz stopped walking and turned to face Emma. "Are you sure? I saw my name on a folder, and the papers inside looked like custody transfer documents. He's planning to move me before we can expose him." Cruz pulled out her phone. "We're out of time for the careful approach. I'm calling for immediate protective custody and an emergency warrant for Hargrove's arrest." As Cruz made her calls, Emma stood on the courthouse steps looking up at the building that represented justice and law in Chicago. Judge Hargrove was somewhere inside those walls, probably destroying evidence and making phone calls to warn his co-conspirators that their operation had been discovered. Emma thought about all the other children who had been processed through Hargrove's courtroom, all the families that had been destroyed by his corrupt rulings, all the criminal activities that had been facilitated by his abuse of judicial power.
In a few hours, when Cruz's colleagues obtained their warrants and made their arrests, this building would hopefully represent justice again. But first, they had to make sure Victor Marlowe and his organization didn't have time to eliminate the evidence or the witnesses that could bring them down. Emma's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or face the consequences. Some secrets are worth killing for." She showed the message to Cruz, who immediately called for additional backup. Emma Taylor's investigation had just become a matter of life and death. The safe house where the FBI moved Emma that evening was a nondescript suburban home that looked like every other house on the street. Agent Cruz had explained that Emma would stay there until they could arrange more permanent protection, but Emma could see the worry in Cruz's eyes. The threatening text message had changed everything. What had been an investigation was now a race against time to prevent Emma from becoming a victim of the very conspiracy she had helped expose. "I've requested a full surveillance team for the house, and we're moving forward with arrests tomorrow morning. But Emma, I need you to think carefully about anyone else who might be able to help us. Anyone with information about Judge Hargrove or Victor Marlowe that we haven't considered yet." Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking through everything she had learned over the past month. Then something occurred to her that she had been too focused on her own case to consider before. "Agent Cruz, what if Judge Hargrove's own family knows what he's doing? I mean, it would be hard to hide this level of corruption from people who live with you, right?" Cruz raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think his family might know?" "When I was researching his background, I found out he has a son about my age, Tom Hargrove. He's a junior at Lincoln High School. If his father is taking bribes and manipulating court cases, there might be signs at home that Tom has noticed." "It's possible," Cruz said thoughtfully, "but approaching a judge's son would be extremely risky. If Tom is loyal to his father—" "What if he's not?" Emma interrupted. "What if he's seen things that worry him but doesn't know what to do about them? I know what it's like to discover that someone you trust has been lying to you." Cruz was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the risks and benefits. "If we were going to make contact with Tom Hargrove, it would have to be very carefully planned, and it would have to seem natural, not like we were targeting him specifically." Emma had an idea. "Lincoln High School has a debate tournament this weekend. My school was supposed to participate before everything happened. I could still register as an independent participant. It would give me a legitimate reason to be there and a chance to talk to Tom without it seeming suspicious." "Emma, that would put you in a public place where Marlowe's people could easily find you." "But it would also put me in a place with hundreds of people, security cameras, and adult supervision. And if Tom Hargrove has information that could help us, this might be our only chance to get it before his father realizes we're looking at his family." Cruz stood up and began pacing the small room. "I don't like it. There are too many variables, too many ways it could go wrong." Emma's phone buzzed with another text message. This time it was from her father. "Sweetheart, I just heard from Agent Cruz about what's happening. I'm so proud of how brave you've been, but please be careful. I can't lose you." Reading her father's message reminded Emma of why she had started this investigation in the first place. "Agent Cruz, how many other kids are out there right now living with people like Susan, waiting to be transferred to the next phase of whatever Marlowe has planned? How many families have been destroyed by Judge Hargrove's corruption?" Cruz stopped pacing and looked at Emma. "We estimate at least 50 children have been affected by Hargrove's rulings in the past 2 years, maybe more." 50 kids, Emma repeated. 50 families torn apart so that criminals could use children for money laundering and trafficking. If Tom Hargrove can help us stop that, isn't it worth the risk? The next morning, Cruz drove Emma to Lincoln High School for the debate tournament registration. They had spent hours the night before planning every detail. Emma would enter the tournament legitimately, Cruz would maintain surveillance from outside the building, and Emma would wear a tiny tracking device that would allow Cruz to monitor her location at all times.
"Remember," Cruz said as they sat in the car outside the school, "your primary goal is just to make contact with Tom Hargrove and assess whether he might be willing to help. Don't push him,
Don't reveal too much information, and if you sense any danger at all, you signal for immediate extraction." Emma nodded, checking that the small panic button Cruz had given her was securely attached to her sleeve. What if he doesn't know anything? What if he's completely unaware of what his father is doing? Then we'll know that avenue is closed to us, and we'll proceed with the evidence we already have. But Emma, your instincts have been right about everything else in this case. If you think Tom Hargrove might be an ally, I trust your judgment. The Lincoln High School cafeteria was buzzing with nervous energy as students from across the city prepared for the debate competition. Emma registered as an independent participant, claiming that her regular school was unable to send a team due to budget constraints. It was a plausible story, and the tournament organizers were happy to have an additional participant. Finding Tom Hargrove was easier than Emma had expected. He was sitting alone at a corner table, reviewing what appeared to be debate notes, but Emma could see from his body language that he was distracted and troubled. He was tall for his age, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that reminded Emma uncomfortably of his father, but there was something vulnerable about his expression that Judge Hargrove had never shown. Emma approached his table carrying her own debate materials. "Excuse me, are you Tom Hargrove? I'm Emma Taylor. I'm competing as an independent today." Tom looked up, and Emma saw recognition flash across his face. "Emma Taylor," he repeated slowly. "You're the girl from my father's custody case. The one who—" He trailed off, but Emma could see that he knew more than he was saying. "The one who got taken away from her real family so your father could collect a bribe from criminals," Emma said quietly, sitting down across from him without waiting for an invitation. Tom's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Emma said gently. "I can see it in your eyes. You've noticed things at home that don't make sense. Phone calls your father takes in private, visitors who don't seem like normal legal colleagues, money that doesn't match his judicial salary." Tom glanced around the cafeteria nervously. "You shouldn't be talking to me about this. If my father found out—" "Tom, I know you're scared, but I need you to know that the FBI is investigating your father for corruption, and they're planning to arrest him very soon. If you have information that could help protect other children from being hurt, this is your chance to do the right thing." Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, Emma saw tears in his eyes. "There's a safe in my father's home office. He thinks I don't know the combination, but I figured it out months ago. Inside are documents, photographs, and what looks like payment records. Emma, there are pictures of children I've never seen before, with notes about their placements and other things." Emma felt her heart racing. What kind of other things? "Instructions about where they should be sent next, who their new guardians should be, how much money is being paid for each placement. Emma, I think my father is selling children." Before Emma could respond, Tom continued, his words tumbling out as if he had been waiting for months to tell someone. "And there are recordings, audio files on his computer of phone calls with someone named Victor. They talk about kids like their inventory, like their products being moved through a warehouse. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? And what would happen to my mom and me if my father went to prison?" Emma reached across the table and touched Tom's hand. "Tom, I know you're scared, but I need you to know that the FBI is investigating your father for corruption, and they're planning to arrest him very soon. If you have information that could help protect other children from being hurt, this is your chance to do the right thing." Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, Emma saw tears in his eyes. "There's a safe in my father's home office. He thinks I don't know the combination, but I figured it out months ago. Inside are documents, photographs, and what looks like payment records. Emma, there are pictures of children I've never seen before, with notes about their placements and other things." Emma felt her heart racing. What kind of other things? Instructions about where they should be sent next, who their new guardians should be, how much money is being paid for each placement. Emma, I think my father is selling children. Before Emma could respond, Tom continued, his words tumbling out as if he had been waiting for months to tell someone. And there are recordings, audio files on his computer of phone calls with someone named Victor. They talk about kids like their inventory, like their products being moved through a warehouse. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? And what would happen to my mom and me if my father went to prison? Emma reached across the table and touched Tom's hand. Tom, I know you're scared, but I need you to know that the FBI is investigating your father for corruption, and they're planning to arrest him very soon. If you have information that could help protect other children from being hurt, this is your chance to do the right thing. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, Emma saw tears in his eyes. There's a safe in my father's home office. He thinks I don't know the combination, but I figured it out months ago. Inside are documents, photographs, and what looks like payment records. Emma, there are pictures of children I've never seen before, with notes about their placements and other things. Emma felt her heart racing. What kind of other things? Instructions about where they should be sent next, who their new guardians should be, how much money is being paid for each placement. Emma, I think my father is selling children. Before Emma could respond, Tom continued, his words tumbling out as if he had been waiting for months to tell someone. And there are recordings, audio files on his computer of phone calls with someone named Victor. They talk about kids like their inventory, like their products being moved through a warehouse. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? And what would happen to my mom and me if my father went to prison? Emma reached across the table and touched Tom's hand. Tom, I know you're scared, but I need you to know that the FBI is investigating your father for corruption, and they're planning to arrest him very soon. If you have information that could help protect other children from being hurt, this is your chance to do the right thing. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, Emma saw tears in his eyes. There's a safe in my father's home office. He thinks I don't know the combination, but I figured it out months ago. Inside are documents, photographs, and what looks like payment records. Emma, there are pictures of children I've never seen before, with notes about their placements and other things. Emma felt her heart racing. What kind of other things? Instructions about where they should be sent next, who their new guardians should be, how much money is being paid for each placement. Emma, I think my father is selling children. Before Emma could respond, Tom continued, his words tumbling out as if he had been waiting for months to tell someone. And there are recordings, audio files on his computer of phone calls with someone named Victor. They talk about kids like their inventory, like their products being moved through a warehouse. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? And what would happen to my mom and me if my father went to prison? Emma reached across the table and touched Tom's hand. Tom, I know you're scared, but I need you to know that the FBI is investigating your father for corruption, and they're planning to arrest him very soon. If you have information that could help protect other children from being hurt, this is your chance to do the right thing. Tom was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, Emma saw tears in his eyes. There's a safe in my father's home office. He thinks I don't know the combination, but I figured it out months ago. Inside are documents, photographs, and what looks like payment records. Emma, there are pictures of children I've never seen before, with notes about their placements and other things. Emma felt her heart racing. What kind of other things? Instructions about where they should be sent next, who their new guardians should be, how much money is being paid for each placement. "Emma, I think my father is selling children." Before Emma could respond, Tom continued, his words tumbling out as if he had been waiting for months to tell someone. "And there are recordings, audio files on his computer of phone calls with someone named Victor. They talk about kids like their inventory, like their products being moved through a warehouse. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? And what would happen to my mom and me if my father went to prison?" Emma reached across the table and touched Tom's hand. "Tom, I know you're scared, but I need you to know that the FBI is investigating your father for corruption, and they're planning to arrest him very—"
Tom stared at the contents of the safe with horror. "I don't know. I mean, I knew there were documents, but I never looked this closely. These children, some of these photos go back years." Emma recognized several faces from her research into Judge Hargrove's cases, but there were so many more. Children she had never seen before, representing custody battles she hadn't discovered in her initial investigation. Each photograph was paper-clipped to documents that detailed the child's placement, payment schedules, and in some cases, disturbing notes about their suitability for various purposes. "Agent Cruz," Emma said, her voice barely steady, "this one is labeled VIP Client Special Request. What does that mean?" Cruz examined the file Emma was pointing to, and her expression darkened. "It means we're not just looking at money laundering and custody manipulation. Some of these children are being specifically selected and placed for even worse purposes." Agent Martinez was downloading files from the computer hard drives, his equipment blinking and humming as it copied years of incriminating evidence. "Agent Cruz, you need to see this. He's got detailed financial records showing payments from at least a dozen different shell companies, all tracing back to Victor Marlowe's organization. We're talking about over $2 million in bribes over the past 3 years. Emma found herself staring at a photograph of a boy who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. According to the attached documents, he had been placed with a guardian who lived in a warehouse district, despite having living relatives who had fought for custody. The case notes indicated that the boy was being used for courier services, a euphemism that made Emma feel sick. "Tom," she said quietly, "how did you live with knowing about this?" Tom's face was streaked with tears. "I told myself it might be legitimate, that maybe I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. But deep down I knew. I've known for months that my father was destroying families, and I did nothing to stop it because I was scared." Agent Cruz placed a gentle hand on Tom's shoulder. "You're stopping it now. What you're doing today will save countless children from the fate your father had planned for them." As Martinez continued copying files, Emma explored other sections of the safe. In the very back, she found a folder labeled Taylor Emma, Phase 2 Placement. Her hands trembled as she opened it and saw detailed plans for her transfer to a location in Detroit, along with a payment schedule showing that someone had paid $50,000 for her specific placement. "Agent Cruz," Emma called, her voice breaking. "They weren't planning to keep me with Susan much longer. I was supposed to be sent to Detroit next week, to someone who paid specifically for a 14-year-old girl with my characteristics." Cruz took the folder and read through the documents, her jaw clenching with anger. "Emma, this confirms everything we suspected about the trafficking network. You weren't just placed randomly. You were selected and sold to someone with particular requirements." The sound of a car door slamming outside made everyone in the room freeze. Tom rushed to the window and went white. "He's home early. My father just pulled into the driveway." Cruz immediately activated her radio. "All units, Judge Hargrove is approaching the house. Execute arrest warrant immediately." Emma could hear footsteps on the front porch, then the sound of a key in the lock. Her heart was pounding so hard she was afraid Judge Hargrove would hear it from downstairs. "Tom," Judge Hargrove's voice echoed through the house. "Are you home? Whose car is in the driveway?" Agent Martinez worked frantically to complete the file transfers, while Cruz positioned herself by the office door, her weapon drawn. Emma grabbed the folder containing her own placement documents, determined that Judge Hargrove would not destroy this evidence of his crimes.
"Tommy!" Judge Hargrove's voice was closer now, and Emma could hear his footsteps on the staircase. "Agent Cruz," Emma whispered urgently. "The window. Tom and I could get out through the window and down the back staircase. That would give Martinez more time to finish copying the files." Before Cruz could respond, Judge Hargrove's voice boomed from directly outside the office door. "Step away from my safe and put your hands where I can see them." Emma turned to see Judge Hargrove standing in the doorway, no longer the composed, judicial figure she remembered from the courtroom. His hair was disheveled, his robes askew, and in his hand was a pistol pointed directly at Agent Cruz. "Father," Tom said, stepping forward, "please don't make this worse than it already is." Judge Hargrove's eyes fell on his son, and Emma saw something break in his expression. "Tommy, what have you done?" "I've done what you should have done years ago. I've chosen to protect children instead of exploiting them." The sound of sirens was growing louder outside, and Judge Hargrove seemed to realize that his years of corruption were finally coming to an end. For a moment, Emma thought he might surrender peacefully. Instead, he turned the gun toward the safe, apparently intending to destroy the evidence, even if he couldn't escape justice. "All those files represent my life's work," he said, his voice filled with bitter pride. "I built an empire, and I won't let a child and a traitorous son tear it down." Emma looked at the photographs of all the children whose lives had been destroyed by Judge Hargrove's empire, and something inside her snapped. "Your life's work?" she said, stepping forward despite Cruz's urgent gesture for her to stay back. "Your life's work is selling children like merchandise? Your life's work is destroying families so criminals can use kids for trafficking and money laundering?" Judge Hargrove's attention focused on Emma, and she could see the cold calculation that had made him so effective at manipulating the legal system. "You have no idea how the world really works, little girl. Sometimes society's institutions need to be flexible to serve larger purposes." "What larger purpose?" Emma demanded. "Making yourself rich? Helping Victor Marlowe expand his criminal empire? What possible justification could there be for what you've done to hundreds of families?" The sound of the FBI tactical team entering the house echoed through the building, and Judge Hargrove seemed to realize that his time was up. He looked at his son one last time, and Emma saw years of disappointment and betrayal pass between them. "I'm sorry you'll never understand, Tommy. I did everything for our family's future." Tom met his father's gaze steadily. "You destroyed our family's future the day you decided money was more important than justice." As the FBI team stormed into the office, Judge Vincent Hargrove fairly lowered his weapon and allowed himself to be arrested. The man who had wielded the power of judicial authority to destroy so many lives was finally being held accountable for his crimes. Emma looked around the office at the evidence that would free her and dozens of other children from the trafficking network and felt something she hadn't experienced since the day her custody was stolen: hope for real justice.
The Chicago Tribune newsroom buzzed with an energy that veteran journalist Sarah Chen hadn't felt in years. Spread across her desk were documents, photographs, and audio recordings that would expose the largest judicial corruption scandal in Illinois history. Across from her sat Emma Taylor, Agent Cruz, and Tom Hargrove, three unlikely allies who had brought down a criminal empire that had operated under the cover of legal authority for years. "I want to make sure I understand the scope of this correctly," Chen said, reviewing her notes. "Judge Vincent Hargrove took bribes totaling over $2 million to manipulate custody cases, placing children with criminal associates who used them for money laundering, trafficking, and other illegal activities?" "That's just what we can prove financially," Agent Cruz replied. "The actual scope of the operation is much larger. We've identified at least 87 children who were placed through fraudulent custody rulings, and Victor Marlowe's organization extends far beyond Chicago." Emma pulled out a folder containing some of the most damning evidence they had recovered from Judge Hargrove's safe. "Miss Chen, these children weren't just randomly placed, they were specifically selected based on age, background, and other characteristics that made them valuable to different parts of Marlowe's operation."
Chen examined the documents Emma handed her, her expression growing more serious with each page. These payment schedules, they're treating children like commodities, different prices for different ages and backgrounds. Exactly, Tom said quietly. My father kept detailed records of every transaction, every placement, every child who was sold through his courtroom. He was proud of how organized his operation was. Chen had been investigating corruption in Chicago for over 2 decades, but she had never seen anything this systematic or this heartless. Emma, what made you first suspect that something was wrong with your custody case? Emma thought back to that day in the courtroom that felt like a lifetime ago. Judge Hargrove didn't even look at the evidence my father presented. He had already made his decision before we walked into the courtroom. And when I started researching his other cases, the patterns were impossible to ignore. The patterns that a 14-year-old girl identified when trained investigators had missed them? Chen noted, impressed despite herself. Because I wasn't looking for evidence of general corruption, I was looking specifically at custody cases, and I was motivated by personal experience. I knew what a loving parent looked like, and I knew what an unfit parent looked like. When I saw Judge Hargrove consistently ruling against the loving parents in favor of the unfit ones, I knew something was systematically wrong. Agent Cruz leaned forward. Miss Chen, we're releasing this information to you first because we want the focus to be on the victims and the systemic nature of the corruption. This isn't just about one corrupt judge. It's about how criminal organizations can infiltrate and manipulate our most trusted institutions. Chen nodded, understanding the responsibility she was being given. What's the current status of the investigation? Have all the perpetrators been arrested? Judge Hargrove is in federal custody and has been charged with racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Marlowe was arrested yesterday at his compound outside the city, along with 7 associates. We're still tracking down the network of fake guardians who were housing the trafficked children. And the children? Chen asked. What happens to the kids who were placed through these fraudulent rulings? Emma's voice grew emotional. That's why this story is so important. There are dozens of children still living with people who aren't really their guardians, people who are using them for criminal purposes. Every day this story doesn't break is another day those kids are in danger. Tom added, My father kept detailed records of where each child was placed and why. The FBI is using those records to locate and rescue the children, but it's a massive operation. Some of the kids have been moved multiple times, some are being held in different states, and some— He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, but Chen understood. Some of the kids might never be found. Chen spent the next several hours reviewing audio recordings of Judge Hargrove's conversations with Victor Marlowe, financial documents showing the flow of bribe money through various shell companies, and photographs of children who had been sold through the corrupt custody system. The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Emma, Chen said as they prepared to wrap up the interview, you've exposed one of the most significant criminal conspiracies in Chicago's history. How do you feel about the impact this will have? Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking about her father, about all the families that had been destroyed, about the children who were still being rescued from their fake guardians. I feel like this is just the beginning, Emma said finally. Judge Hargrove and Victor Marlowe are just 2 people in a system that allowed this to happen. How many other judges are taking bribes? How many other criminal organizations are using family courts to traffic children? How many other kids are living with people who bought them instead of loved them? Chen recognized the passion in Emma's voice, the same drive that had led her to uncover this conspiracy in the first place. What do you plan to do next? I want to make sure this never happens again. I want to speak to legislators about reforming the family court system, to other kids about recognizing the signs of corruption, to anyone who will listen about the importance of protecting children from adults who see them as property instead of people. That evening, Chen's story broke simultaneously online and in the Tribune's print edition. The headline read, 14-year-old exposes massive judicial corruption ring. Chicago judge sold children to criminal organization for over $2 million. Within hours, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and every major newspaper in the country was covering Emma Taylor's investigation and the systematic corruption she had uncovered. Social media exploded with outrage, support for Emma, and demands for immediate action to protect other vulnerable children. Emma watched the coverage from the FBI safe house where she was staying until the full extent of Marlowe's organization could be dismantled. She saw her photograph on television screens across the country, heard her story being told by news anchors and talk show hosts, and read thousands of comments from people who were inspired by her courage. But what moved her most was a call from her father. "Emma, sweetheart." David Taylor's voice was thick with emotion. "I just saw the news coverage. I am incredibly proud of who you've become and what you've accomplished. Dad, when can I come home?" "Agent Cruz says probably next week, once they're sure it's safe. The judge who's handling our custody case, a real judge this time, has already indicated that Judge Hargrove's ruling will be overturned immediately." Emma felt tears of relief streaming down her face. "Dad, I love you, and I promise when I get home we're going to work together to make sure this never happens to another family." "I love you too, sweetheart. And Emma, you've already changed the world. Now come home so we can change it even more." As Emma hung up the phone, she realized that the scared, confused girl who had sat in Judge Hargrove's courtroom 6 weeks ago was gone forever. In her place was someone who understood the power of speaking truth to authority, someone who knew that even the youngest voices could challenge the most powerful institutions, someone who would spend the rest of her life fighting for justice. The story that had started with one girl's determination to understand why her family had been torn apart had become a national call to action for protecting children and reforming a system that had failed them. Emma Taylor was no longer just a victim of corruption, she was a symbol
of the courage it takes to fight injustice, no matter how young you are or how powerful your opponents might be. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago had never seen anything like the media circus surrounding United States v. Vincent Hargrove. News vans lined the streets, reporters crowded the courthouse steps, and security had been tripled to manage the crowds of supporters, protesters, and curiosity seekers who wanted to witness the trial of the decade. Emma Taylor sat in the witness section, flanked by Agent Cruz and her father, David, who had been reunited with his daughter 2 weeks earlier when an emergency hearing had immediately overturned Judge Hargrove's corrupt custody ruling. Emma's hands were steady, but her heart was racing as she prepared to testify against the man who had nearly destroyed her family. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to the Morrison law firm that had been part of the corruption network, presided over the courtroom with the kind of dignity and impartiality that Judge Hargrove had never shown. She had been specially appointed to handle the case due to the sensitive nature of the charges and the need for absolute integrity in the proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Federal Prosecutor James Wellington began his opening statement. Over the next several days, you will hear evidence of a corruption scheme so systematic and so heartless that it challenges our fundamental beliefs about justice and the protection of children. Emma watched the jury's faces as Wellington outlined the charges: racketeering, conspiracy, bribery, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. The 12 men and women looked appropriately horrified as Wellington described how Judge Hargrove had sold judicial decisions to the highest bidder, treating children like inventory in a criminal enterprise. Judge Hargrove sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller and older than Emma remembered. Gone was the imposing figure in black robes who had wielded absolute authority in his courtroom. In his place sat a man in an ill-fitting suit,
flanked by lawyers who knew they were fighting an unwinnable case. The prosecution will present evidence, Wellington continued, that the defendant, Vincent Hargrove, accepted over $2 million in bribes from criminal organizations in exchange for manipulating custody cases. But this case is about more than money. It's about the systematic abuse of judicial power to facilitate the trafficking and exploitation of vulnerable children.
Emma watched Judge Hargrove's face as Marlowe described children as revenue generators and clients with specific requirements. Even now, even after being exposed and arrested, Judge Hargrove showed no remorse for what he had done to vulnerable families. The defense's case was brief and ineffective. Thornfield called character witnesses who testified to Judge Hargrove's previous reputation for fairness and dedication, but their testimony rang hollow in the face of overwhelming evidence of systematic corruption. Judge Hargrove himself chose not to testify, probably on the advice of his lawyers, who knew that cross-examination would only make things worse for their client. In his closing argument, Prosecutor Wellington stood before the jury and summarized what they had learned over 2 weeks of testimony. Ladies and gentlemen, Vincent Hargrove betrayed every principle of justice, every oath he took as a judge, and every child who came before his bench seeking protection. He sold his judicial authority to criminals who used children as tools in their illegal operations. Wellington gestured toward Emma, who sat with her father in the gallery. But this case is also about the power of courage and determination to overcome corruption. Emma Taylor proved that you don't have to be an adult to fight injustice. You don't have to have legal training to recognize corruption. And you don't have to accept that the system is broken just because powerful people benefit from that brokenness. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. As Judge Hargrove was led away in handcuffs to begin a sentence of 25 years to life in federal prison, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: complete vindication. Justice had been served, not just for her family, but for all the families that had been destroyed by Judge Hargrove's corruption. The system that had failed so catastrophically had ultimately held itself accountable, thanks to the courage of a 14-year-old girl who refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Emma looked at her father, at Agent Cruz, at Tom Hargrove, and at all the people who had supported her fight for justice. The courtroom battle was over, but her real work was just beginning. 6 months after Judge Vincent Hargrove's conviction, Emma Taylor stood at the podium in the Illinois State Capitol, looking out at an audience of legislators, child advocacy groups, and families who had been affected by judicial corruption. The girl who had once sat helplessly in a corrupt courtroom was now addressing the state legislature about comprehensive reforms to the family court system. "Honorable members of the Illinois General Assembly," Emma began, her voice clear and confident. "6 months ago, I was just another teenager who trusted that our legal system would protect me and my family. Today, I stand before you as someone who has seen firsthand how that system can be corrupted, and more importantly, how it can be fixed." In the audience, Emma could see her father, David, beaming with pride. Beside him sat Agent Cruz, who had become not just an ally, but a mentor and friend. Tom Hargrove was there too, having found his own path toward redemption by working with child advocacy organizations to identify and help other victims of judicial corruption. Emma's speech outlined the Emma Taylor Child Protection Act, a comprehensive piece of legislation that would revolutionize how family courts operated in Illinois. The bill required random assignment of custody cases to prevent judge shopping, mandated financial disclosure for all parties in custody proceedings, established an independent oversight board to monitor judicial decisions, and created a whistleblower protection program for court employees who witnessed corruption. The reforms we're proposing today, Emma continued, aren't just about preventing future corruption. They're about rebuilding trust in a system that thousands of families depend on to protect their most precious relationships. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of activity and healing. Emma and her father had moved to a new apartment, creating fresh memories in a space untainted by the trauma of the custody battle. Emma had returned to school, where she was treated as something of a celebrity by her classmates, though she worked hard to maintain her focus on education and normal teenage activities. But it was her advocacy work that had become her true passion. Working with a team of lawyers, child psychologists, and former FBI agents, she had helped develop protocols for identifying potentially corrupted custody cases and had spoken at conferences across the country about the warning signs that families should watch out for. The ripple effects of Emma's investigation had extended far beyond Chicago. Federal investigations had been launched in 12 other states where similar patterns of custody manipulation had been identified. 3 more judges had been arrested, and dozens of criminal organizations had been dismantled as law enforcement agencies applied the investigative techniques that Emma had pioneered. Most importantly, 87 children had been rescued from the trafficking network and reunited with their legitimate families or placed in genuine protective custody. Emma had met with many of these children and their families, sharing her story and helping them understand that they were not alone in their trauma. The critics of these reforms, Emma said, addressing a common objection to the legislation, argue that additional oversight and transparency requirements will slow down the family court system. To them, I say this: a system that prioritizes speed over accuracy is a system that will inevitably fail the children it's meant to protect. Emma paused, thinking about a conversation she had had the previous week with Maria Santos, the sister of the girl Agent Cruz had been unable to save 15 years earlier. Maria had traveled from Detroit to meet Emma, wanting to thank her for preventing other families from experiencing the loss that had devastated her own. My sister Maria would be 27 years old today. Because of what you did, 27 other families won't have to wonder what happened to their children. 27 other families won't have to live with the kind of loss that has defined my life. That conversation had reinforced Emma's commitment to ensuring that her investigation would lead to lasting change, not just temporary headlines. As Emma concluded her speech to the legislature, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that awful day in Judge Hargrove's courtroom. The scared, confused girl who had watched her family being torn apart had evolved into someone who understood that individual trauma could be transformed into collective action, that personal pain could become a source of strength for fighting systemic injustice. In closing, Emma said, I want to remind everyone in this room that the fight for justice is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing commitment to protecting the vulnerable, holding the powerful accountable, and ensuring that our institutions serve the people they're meant to protect. The standing ovation that followed Emma's speech lasted nearly 5 minutes. As legislators and advocates rose to their feet, Emma saw tears in many eyes and determination in many faces. The Emma Taylor Child Protection Act would pass by an overwhelming majority 2 weeks later, and similar legislation would be introduced in 38 other states within 6 months. After the speech, Emma walked out onto the Capitol steps with her father, Agent Cruz, and Tom. The media was waiting, as they always were when Emma made public appearances, but she had learned to use their attention strategically to amplify her message about child protection and judicial reform. Emma, called out a reporter from the Chicago Tribune, "What's next for you? Will you continue your advocacy work?" Emma smiled, thinking about the scholarship offers she had received from universities across the country, all eager to support her education in law, criminal justice, or public policy. She had also received offers to write a book about her experience and to develop a documentary about judicial corruption.
"I'm 15 years old," Emma replied. "I still have high school to finish, and I want to experience some normal teenage things. But yes, I'll continue advocating for children and families
Need someone to speak up for them. This work isn't something you do for a few months and then move on from. It's a lifelong commitment." David Taylor put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, remembering the broken family they had been just 6 months earlier. "I'm incredibly proud of Emma, not just for exposing this corruption, but for turning her pain into purpose. She's shown that age is no barrier to making a difference in the world." Agent Cruz, who had been promoted to head the FBI's expanded public corruption unit, partly based on the success of the Hargrove investigation, added her own perspective. "Emma has fundamentally changed how we investigate judicial corruption. Her analytical approach and willingness to look at patterns that adults had missed have become part of our standard training protocols." Tom Hargrove, now a sophomore at Northwestern University studying social work, spoke quietly about his own journey. "Emma gave me the courage to choose justice over family loyalty. She showed me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable for their actions." As the press conference concluded and the small group walked toward their cars, Emma reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been an ordinary teenager worried about math tests and friendships. Today, she was someone who had taken on one of Chicago's most powerful institutions and won. But more than the victory, Emma valued the relationship she had built and the understanding she had gained about the importance of speaking up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. She thought about the children who were now safe because of her investigation, the families who had been reunited because of her courage, and the reforms that would protect future generations because of her refusal to accept injustice. Emma Taylor's fight for justice had begun with a personal tragedy, but it had evolved into something much larger, a movement that would continue long after her own story had ended. She had learned that the most powerful force in the world isn't authority or wealth or influence. It's the willingness of ordinary people to do extraordinary things when justice demands it. As she got into the car with her father to drive home to their new life, Emma smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, and new chances to prove that the youngest voices can speak the loudest truths. The girl who had once been a victim of corruption had become a guardian of justice, and her story would inspire countless others to believe that no injustice is too big to challenge, no corruption too powerful to expose, and no voice too young to change the world. Justice, Emma had learned, doesn't have an age limit. It only requires courage, determination, and the unshakable belief that right will ultimately triumph over wrong, especially when young people refuse to accept that the world can't be made better. The fight for justice never ends, but neither does the power of hope, and Emma Taylor would carry both of them with her for the rest of her life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.